Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot daf Kuf Aleph. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with the Mishna at the bottom of Kuf Amud Bet at the bottom. So we have these three women, Mime'enet, Shnia, and Aylonit. Okay, so someone who was betrothed at a young age by her mother or brother. She then says, I don't want to be married to this man, or she's married to someone who's forbidden to each other on a rabbinic level, or she's an aylonit, she's in a status where she can't bear children. Again, it's a particular type of not being able to bear children, someone who never sees signs of puberty, etc. Okay, we're going to get into a lot of the details today of those things. I explained some in the other class, in the previous class. The second part of the Mishna is going to be important for later in today's daf. If he married her knowing that she was an aylonit, then she gets her ketuba, yesh la ketuba. And that seems to stand in contrast to Amanah kohen gadol, Grusha v'chalutza kohen Yom Mamzer Nitina l'Israel, and by Israel and Nitinu l'Mamzer, all these forbidden relationships that yesh them ketuba, and it seems to be different from the beginning of our Mishna. That it doesn't really matter whether he knew or didn't know. It sounds like she gets ketuba anyway, although we might change this understanding as we go on. Then we had a machlok at Rav and Shmuel. So Rav says that the Mishna is talking about a ketana. I'll start from there. Rav tane ketana, yotza beget and la ketuba, kosh came in ma'en. The Mishna is not only talking about miun, it's talking about any minor who was married by or was betrothed by her mother or brother, because the father wasn't in the picture, and it was only rabbinic marriage. She doesn't get a ketuba either in a marriage like that. And then obviously if she does miun, because then she basically undoes the marriage from the beginning. So if he, the point is, if he divorces her, or if she does miun, either which way she's not going to get her ketuba if she's still a minor. Shmuel tannaim mima'enet and la ketuba. Yotzeit beget yesh la ketuba. And Shmuel holds no, she's going to get her ketuba if she was a minor, even if her mother or brother betrothed her, and he gives her a get, she's getting a ketuba. That was a fair square marriage. It was only if she did miun that she undoes the marriage and then she doesn't get a ketuba. The answer Shmuel l'tameh, he goes according to as he says elsewhere. The Amar Shmuel mima'enet and la ketuba. Yotza beget yesh la ketuba. Shmuel's listing four things here. Number one, differences between a mima'enet and a ketana who gets a divorce. Right, the husband divorces her rather than she decides I don't want to stay married to you. So he says number one, and la ketuba, whereas Yotzei beget has a ketuba. Mima'enet lo pasla min ha'achim, she's not forbidden to any of his relatives. V'lo pasla min ha'keuna, and she's not forbidden to a kohen. Meaning, if she gets divorced, right, she's not like miun doesn't make her considered a divorced woman. But Yotza beget, pasla min ha'achim or pasla min ha'keuna. If he gives her a divorce, then she is forbidden to all the relatives, and he to her. And pasla min ha'keuna, she can't marry a kohen. She's actually a real fair and square divorced woman. Mima'enet, fourth thing, and it's she doesn't need to wait this 3-month waiting period in between marrying one guy and another. It's usually there to make sure that we don't get confused whose child is whose. That's because normally we assume women who are underage can't have children. They can't get pregnant, so there's not really a concern. However, in a regular case of a ketana, we do make her wait, just so that lo plug, we don't start making distinctions. However, in this case, since she did miun and basically undid the marriage from the get-go, it was as if they were never married, and there's no reason to institute this concern of this gzeira of the 3 months because of other cases, because it's not even similar to other cases. But Yotza beget would tzricha lamtin shlosha chodeshim. So here we have 4 differences between them. And one of them, right, we're now saying, oh, Shmuel goes according to the way he says here, it's the same idea. To which the Gemara says, "My kamashmalan tanina kulu," which is a bit of a strange question, but the Gemara asks, I'll tell you why it's strange in a minute. What is this coming to teach us? We already learned all these things. Now, we didn't actually learn all these things, but Shmuel, why is he telling us this? It says this all in the Mishna. Which Mishna? Well, the first one, it says in our Mishna, certainly the way Shmuel reads our Mishna, that it's talking about a mima'enet and not one who gets divorced. And it says in Yevamot, "Hamima'enet beish hu mutar b'krovoteha v'hi mutar b'krovav." That was number 2 on Shmuel's list. She can marry his relatives. He can marry her relatives. V'lo psalam min ha'keuna. She's not disqualified from the kuna. That was number 3 on the list. Natan laget. If he gives her a divorce, though, hu asor b'krovotev v'asor b'krovav, then they're forbidden to each other's relatives. And tzricha and upaslam min ha'keuna. And she's disqualified from being marrying a kohen because she's a divorcee. So there you have numbers 2 and 3. Our Mishnah is number 1. All of them. Strange question because it's not really all of them. And that's the Gemara's answer. Because he wanted to tell us number 4, so we started off with 1, 2, and 3 that we already know from the Mishnah, and then added number 4 as well. Lema kitana, okay, delotna, because that one wasn't in the Mishnah. Lema kitana. Let's suggest that Rav and Shmuel actually are having the same halachic that the 2 tannaim had, and they're each siding one with the other. Rabbi Eliezer Homer, ein maaseh ketana klum. Rabbi Eliezer says a minor who does any sort of action, it's irrelevant. Meaning, right, if she goes and gets married, not with her father's betrothal, but let's say mother or brother marry her off, or she betroths herself, maybe, it's an irrelevant action. Her husband does not get any lost items for hers, any items she finds, lo masayada, not her salary, lo b'hafarat nedareah, he can't annul her vows. You basically don't have a normal husband and wife relationship. Ve'eno yorsha ve'eno metamela. He doesn't inherit her property, and he doesn't become tamei to her. Let's say he's a kohen, he can't become impure to her, or he doesn't sit shiva for her if she dies. Klalo shel davar. Okay, again, we're talking about a minor who was married, betrothed in a way that she could do miyun to get out of it. So now they say, she's right. The klalo shel davar, the general principle is she's not really considered his wife. But the fact is, the only thing is that if she wants to get out of it, she has to do miyun. She's married enough that it requires miyun to get out of it. Rabbi Yoshua, he's going to say the exact reverse. It is something. He can take an item that she finds. It's his. He gets her salary. He can annul her vows. He inherits her and becomes impure to her. The general principle is she's actually his wife for all intents and purposes. Other than one thing, that she doesn't need to get out, she actually could leave with miyun. So now what do you see? Rav who says that a ketana who leaves, right, who gets a get, she doesn't have a ketuba, okay? She doesn't get her ketuba rights because she's not really married to him for all intents and purposes. And therefore, that matches Rabbi Eliezer. And Shmuel says she gets a ketuba if she was divorced by him. Damar Rabbi Yoshua. So that seems like makes a lot of sense. All the rights are there. Now pay attention closely. The rights we're talking about are her ketuba rights. The rights that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, that's what Rav and Shmuel were talking about, which are her rights. The rights that Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer were talking about were his rights to her property. Okay, her salary, her items she finds on the street, things like that. So that's in the end going to be a distinction they're going to mention. So the Gemara rejects this and says, no, not necessarily. According to Rabbi Eliezer, really there's no machlokes. Meaning, according to Rabbi Eliezer, she's not his wife for all intents and purposes, and there's no other way to read it, basically. The only way to read it is like Rav said, and basically she doesn't get her ketuba. Because if he doesn't have his rights, she obviously doesn't have her rights. But both can actually explain themselves according to Rabbi Yoshua. Shmuel could say, I agree with Rabbi Yoshua exactly. He has rights, she has rights, it's all one and the same. But Rav, he's going to distinguish Rav between his rights to her stuff and her rights to the ketuba. Not the same. So when Rabbi Yoshua said it, he was talking about he gets rights, her responsibilities to him. She has to give him her ketuba, her salary, all those things. But he doesn't necessarily have to give her the ketuba. Just because she gives him all that stuff, he doesn't necessarily need to give the ketuba. You might say that seems unfair, but actually they were trying to protect the woman. Why were they trying to protect the woman? This ketana, who either became in this situation because her father died, already is going to have a harder time getting married. Number 2, also because could be the father married her off and she got divorced, and now the father can't marry her off anymore. She's called the Yetoma b'chayei ha'av. We've seen this before. She becomes kind of what's called an orphan in the lifetime of her father because her father can't betroth her. So it's either which way, it's going to be much harder for her to get betrothed. And therefore, they wanted to make it easier by saying, well, you don't have to give her a ketuba, and that would encourage people to marry this woman. So the idea, girl, you should say. So the idea is to try to protect her and enable her to get remarried or married in the first place, depending on which situation. And that's why it goes in one way and not the other. Okay, so we basically proved this isn't necessarily the same debate Rav and Shmuel are having is not necessarily the same debate that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua had. Now moving on to the next case in the Mishna. Amar Rav Huna berei derav Chia l'Rav Kahana. Amar Lam Mishmei de Shmuel. Okay, so Rav Huna berei derav Chia says to Rav Kahana that you told us in the name of Shmuel, Lo shanu ela nechsei malog. What are we talking about blaot? We're talking about worn out clothing that she brought in as her nechsei malog. That's her use of her property. It's her inheritance kind of thing. Things that were hers, she brings in and she takes out as is. So now, what are we talking about blaot? Bit of a debate what it is. We're going to explain it that basically if he uses her nechsei malog, which is, we're going to see according to what Rav Kahana says here. So, right, because Rav Huna bar Chia said to Rav Kahana, you told us in the name of Shmuel. It's going to be clear that generally, the woman's nechsei, let's talk about the nechsei tzom barzel for a minute. Nechsei tzom barzel, basically, he assumes responsibility for them. He doesn't assume responsibility for nechsei malog. So as they went in, that's how they go out. He assumes responsibility for nechsei tzom barzel, which means that whatever price they are at the time of the marriage, he's going to return to her that value, either the objects themselves, if they're worth that amount, or if they're not, he'll have to either add more, or if they're worth more, he'll take them out, or he can just give her an amount of money that's worth that. He assumes responsibility. And because he assumes responsibility, he therefore can use them. So if they wear out, that's his right. He doesn't necessarily have to pay her back for them. But nechsei malog, he's not actually allowed to use. So under normal circumstances, he's supposed to return to her. If he does use them and wears them out from his use, he actually is responsible to give her the value of what he used and the depreciation. So now, this is a normal case. So comes Rav Kahana and says, in the name of Shmuel, this is what Rav Huna is quoting him as having said in the name of Shmuel, that we're talking here about nechsei malog. They don't get the belai for the nechsei malog, the wear and tear, the depreciation of the nechsei malog that the husband caused, even though in a normal case she would have gotten it, here she doesn't get it. Aval nechsei tzom barzel itla, but she does get the belai on the nechsei tzom barzel, which is actually weird because she shouldn't get that even in a normal case. We're going to have to understand this. So Havi bar Rav Papa Ahayim. Rav Papa said, of which case are you referring to? And if you're talking about a woman who refused the marriage, if they're there, they're in existence, whatever she brought into the marriage, she's going to get back her nechsei tzom barzel, her nechsei malog. She brought it into the marriage. Of course, she's going to get them back. It's as if the marriage never happened. They go back to her. If they're not there anymore, and they're depreciated. So what about the value? She's actually not going to get any of it. Again, some people explain that maybe this is because we want to encourage the husband to marry. We want to encourage people to marry this woman. So it's another thing that we're basically saying in a woman who's a ketana, we're not going to make him be responsible for the wear and tear. Ela aylonit. Again, an aylonit, if it's there. So of course she's going to get them back. Now, if they're not there anymore, then what's normal? And this is what we said before. We're going to assume what's typical should happen. What's typical? Because the nechsei malog are in her domain, and he doesn't assume responsibility, so he theoretically can't use them. So you should return them to her. Nechsei tzom barzel they're not in her domain, so leitla, she shouldn't get them. Right? He is allowed to use them. So any depreciation, he shouldn't have to return it to her. So Ella, it must be a shnia. It must be if they were married in a way that was forbidden. And why is this? Kansu Rabbanan l'dida b'didei l'didei b'dida. Basically, it's the flip of what you would have assumed because the rabbis wanted to penalize him and her. So what did they say? Her, you're deserving of nechsei malog, of the depreciation because he's not allowed to use them. Guess what? You're losing that. And that will discourage her from marrying someone who she's not allowed to marry. Again, it's only rabbinic, so they have to come up with methods of discouraging this kind of thing. He is not supposed to have to pay for the nechsei tzom barzel, for the depreciation, because he's allowed to use them. So those he's going to have to pay her for. Okay? So now, Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Shma minami derav kahana. So now this is going to say something that I said already from the beginning, but this is all inferred from Rav Kahana. Rav Shimi bar Ashi says we can infer from him when she brings in a cloak to a marriage, karnahavi, the cloak is considered the principal. Okay, now what does this mean? Normally he's allowed to, even nechsei malog, used for property, he's allowed to get payroll from it, to plant the land, let's say it's land, and get proceeds. But if it's a cloak, he can't use it. You can't say that that's payroll. The loma kasila, he can't use it to cover him, the azil adibale, and wear it out, because he doesn't have rights to that. That's not considered payroll. To which the Gemara says, V'hamar of Nachman Perehavi, what do you mean? That is proceeds. Using a jacket is proceeds. That should be one of the rights he has with her nechsim alone. To which they say, to Rav Nachman Pliga, it's a machloket, whether he has rights to use this jacket or doesn't have rights to use the jacket. Ein lahem ketuba. Now we go back to this. They don't get their ketuba. What does it mean they don't get their ketuba? So we have to define what's v'laot, what is ketuba. Ketuba has different parts to it. There's the 200 and the 100, depending on virgin or not. There's the tosefet. He adds money. So Amar Shmuel Loshanu Ela Manim Atayim. We're only talking about the 100 or 200. Aval tosefet yeshla. She gets the additional. Tanya Namihachi. There's also a brighter to support this. Nashim Shamru Chachamim Ein Lehem Ketuba. Kigon HaMe'enet V'Chavroteha. Ein Lehem Manim Atayim. And there's a brighter to say this. Any place where the rabbi said Ein Lehem Ketuba. Okay, where the Mishna. Usually it's the language of the Mishna or a brighter or something. It says they don't get a ketuba, like the Mima'enet and those others, which is a reference to our Mishnah. They don't get manematayim aval tosefet yeshla. Why? Because the husband promised her this tosefet. That's a promise from him to her. That's going to be relevant no matter what. But nashim sha'amru chachamim yotzot shelo b'ketuba. But when the woman does something to go against the marriage contract, like the whole Mishnah about Dat Yehudit and Dat Moshe and all those things, she feeds him food that she didn't take maestro. She goes out in the shuk with her hair uncovered, etc. That says Yotzot Shelo B'Ketuba, and it uses that language, Kigon Overet Al Dat V'Chapoteha, like that Mishnah and Daf Ayin Bet about all the women who were Overet Al Dat Moshe Yehudit, Ein Lahem Tosefet V'Kol Shekem Maneh Matayim. They don't get the Tosefet, and obviously they don't get the base of the ketuba either. Obviously, when you say Ein Lahem Ketuba, it includes the basics, but not even the Tosefet. By Yotzeit Mishum Shemra. What if there's rumors that you slept around with someone? No telet masha lefaneh v'yotzam. She gets her nichsim elog and leaves, meaning she doesn't get anything else. She does get her nichsim elog. Meseyah le Rav Huna, this supports Rav Huna. The Amar Rav Huna zinta lo hifsida b'laotea kayamim. Supports Rav Huna, who said if she was zinta, she slept with someone else, she cheated on him, she does get whatever's left of her nichsim elog. In other words, we don't say you lose even your own stuff, right? We penalize you that you're not going to get your ketuba and all those extra payments, but we're not going to not allow you to take your own stuff. Now, on Amubed, Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman. Someone brought a bright in front of Rav Nachman and said the following, against what we just said. Zinta ifsida blauta kayami. If she goes and does znut, then she loses her blauta. She loses her nichsim elog. Amarle, Rav Nachman said to him, Imizinta, Kela Mizanai. It's a very funny line. Just because she slept around with some other man and cheated on her husband, what did her clothes do? They weren't guilty, even though obviously it's her connection to her clothes. But the point is really, what did the clothes have anything to do with the marriage? This was her stuff she brought in. Of course, she gets to take them out. Therefore, today you should read in that braita, change the wording to lo hifsida blauta. She didn't lose her stuff. Blauta kayamim. Whatever's left of them. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan. Now we get a little bit of an explanation of how we could just change this. Zo divrei Rabbi Yochanan stimta. There is actually a braita that says, the one who quoted a braita in front of Rav Nachman that Rav Nachman didn't agree with is actually the opinion of Rabbi Nachman stimta. But aval chachamim omrim zinta lo hafsida blauta kayamim. But the rabbis disagree with him, and that's what Rav Nachman told him, change the language of the braita because he didn't want people to think that this was the halacha. So we said, change the wording to match what the rabbis said. Im mitchila nisa. Now we get to the end of our Mishnah where it talked about if he married her knowing, then she gets a ketuba. She was an aylonit. Okay? And then there was that next line about the almanah, which we assumed she has a ketuba no matter what, whether he knew or didn't know. So Amar Rav Huna, aylonit isha ve'ina isha. Almanah isha gemura. You don't even know what this means exactly, but an aylonit is married and not married, and a widow is married. What on earth does this mean? We'll explain right now. Aylonit isha ve'ina isha, meaning it depends on the situation. He kirba, if he knew she was an aylonit, yesh la ketuba, she gets her ketuba money. Lo kirba, but if he didn't know she was an aylonit and he married her, Ein lak ketuba, because he could claim, this was a mistake. I never meant to marry her. I never would have married a woman who can't bear children from me if I had known that. Again, you have to remember, she's a particular type of non-childbearing woman. Okay, it's not like most women nowadays who have issues. Again, nowadays, first of all, it could be a woman, it could be the man, and right, we also have more ways to figure it out in our day. But the idea here is that she never had signs of puberty at all, right? Like she had certain deformities, or I wouldn't say deformities, not the right word, but she just didn't develop. Okay, she didn't develop ever the way women normally develop. So now, this woman is, if he knew it going in, then he married her anyway. So then, of course, she gets her ketuba. But almana isha gvuha. But if an almana marries a kohen gadol, a widow goes and marries a kohen gadol. Now, either which way, she's going to be married to him, okay, and she'll get her ketuba, and that's how we read the Mishnah. Bein hikirba, bein lo hikirba, whether he knew or didn't know, yesh la ketuba. Because if she duped him into marrying him and didn't say she was a widow and lied to him, that's not so bad. Because, okay, no, it's a good question. Why? Commentaries try to answer the question. It's actually a really good question. What's the difference? Why would a man, we're assuming if he had known she couldn't have children, he never would have married her. But if he had known she was a widow and he was a kohen gadol, why he would have married her anyway? It's not so clear cut. And in fact, shouldn't worry about too much, because we're going to reject Rav Huna in the end anyway. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it really all depends on the scenario. He kirba, yesh la ketuba, lo kirba yem la ketuba, with both of them. If she duped him into believing something, it wasn't true, she didn't tell him, or he didn't know. Maybe she didn't know. I don't know. Not the aylonit, maybe she didn't know. It depends what age she was. Could still be waiting. Maybe it'll come later. Anyway, then she doesn't have a ketuba because, right, he didn't know. And he could claim it was a mistake. I never would have married you. But if he knew and married her anyway, then she gets her ketuba. Now we're going to bring a question against Rav Huna. He betroths her thinking that she's that way, meaning she's a widow, or right, this is the widow case. And it turns out she was a widow. Yesh la ketuba, she gets a ketuba. Hastama, but if it was stam, right, where now, again, it didn't say this, but they're inferring that if it was stam, ein la ketuba. Okay, it sounds like if he didn't know, it sounds like she doesn't have a ketuba. That sounds to match the second opinion and not the first. Ela ema, so what do they say? No. Say knasa b'chezkat she'ena kain, v'nimtzet she'i kain ein la ketuba. Read it as, if he betrothed her thinking that she wasn't that way, and it turns out she was that way, ein la ketuba. In other words, if she said, I am not a widow, and she lied, that's different from stam, where she just didn't say anything. Aval stam amai, okay, then according to this, if it was stam though, right, only if she lied outright and said, I am not a widow. But if it was just stam, what would be the case? Ila, she would have a ketuba. Now, if that's the case, though, we're going to have a problem, another problem with Rav Huna. Aditani b'chezkat she'ken v'nimtzet she'ken, yesh la ketuba, l'shminan stama v'kol sheken ha. So first question is, if that's really the case, then the Mishnah should have said that case. Okay, I'm sorry, the Breita. When it said, b'chezkat she'ken v'nimtzet she'ken, he thought she was, and it turns out she was, she gets her ketuba. If stam case, also she gets her ketuba, where she just didn't offer any information, and then it turns out she was, she still gets her ketuba. It should have said that case, and we would have assumed kol sheken, the other case. Ve'od, and furthermore, Tane, it says in a Breita, in our Mishnah, knasa biyadua v'nimtzet biyadua yesh la ketuba. Okay, if he married her via, one second, this is from the Breita, one second, I think this is a different source. Again, yeah, in a different Breita. In a different Breita, it says knasa biyadua v'nimtzet biyadua yesh la ketuba, which sounds like, right, and then it says explicitly knasa stam ein la ketuba. So in that case, it says specifically if knasa stam, she doesn't have a ketuba, tiyuv tadin Rav Huna. That actually knocks out Rav Huna. To which they're going to say, well, what was Rav Huna thinking when he said it? And this we also thought when we read the Mishnah. Rav Huna matnitin at ite. The Mishnah messed him up, confused him. Who sever me to come aflig ba'aylonit below come aflig ba'almana? Again, how did our Mishnah? It started off with an aylonit, and those other women don't get a ketuba. But if he knew she was an aylonit, she does get a ketuba. And then it just said almana and all these other people. get a ketuba. So he assumed, didn't say they don't get a ketuba in any case, so it must be, there's a distinction between those two cases, which is what he said. Right? So let me just read again. Who's sabar me to come maflig ba'aylonit below come maflig ba'almana, because the Mishna specified two different cases of an aylonit and only said one case of an almana. He assumed that michlal, from there you can assume the almana afilu b'stamanami ila. Then an almana, no matter what, gets her ketuba. That's the way of the simple reading of the Mishna. But in the end, they say velohi. That's not how to read the Mishna. Ki katane le'almana aplukta da aylonikai. When it said almana, it was talking about like the same distinction that we just made in the aylonit. It will be the same distinction for the widow and all those other cases in the Mishnah as well. They'll have a ketuba, but only if he knew before they would like this. If he didn't know, Stam case, they didn't say anything, then no. And with that, we're going to start this 12th parak. Definitely getting closer to the end of this Masech. Smart woman, she gets married to a man. She already had a previous marriage. She has a daughter. She says, listen, I'll marry you, but promise me that you're going to support my daughter for 5 years. So he's required, okay? Even if they get divorced, because it's not a condition of the marriage it's not a condition that's connected with her being married to him. And therefore, this woman is even smarter. Let's say she gets divorced from him after a year. Now she gets married to somebody else. She says to him, under condition, stipulates that you're going to support my daughter for 5 years, and he agrees. He also needs to. This daughter's getting 2 mizona, one from one husband and one from the other. The first one can't say, only if she's living with me, I'll feed her, but she's not living with me anymore, I'm not. Can't say that. He has to bring the mizona to where her mother is. And furthermore, let's split it 50-50. Right? We promised her mizonot. As long as I give half and you give half, she'll get a full amount of one portion of mizonot. Nope. Ela echad zana. Well, no, you can't give her double the amount of food. It'll just go to waste. So one gives her food, and the second one gives her money for food, the amount that he would have spent on her food. Niseit, if she marries, the daughter gets married now, and now she has the husband who's feeding her. So the husband feeds her. She continues to get food from both of these previous husbands of her mother. Okay, and they have to give her not food, but the value of the food. Metu. Now here we come up with the most ironic of all. When they die, what happens? So they have to feed their daughters, men. We've already learned that daughters, when they get from the estate, they can only get from land that's free, not land that was sold. Because remember, mizonot has no end amount, no set amount, and therefore when they sell, they can't sell the property and with a lien on it because they don't know how many years they'll get mizonot or anything. So anyway, they only can collect from bnei cholim. But this woman, this daughter, she can take from lien property. Why? Because she's like anyone who's owed money from them. Because it's a promise to pay her. It's not from laws of mizonot, food of daughters. No, it was a separate stipulation that the wife made. And because of that, it's more like a chov. And therefore, she could take it from nechasim mishuavadim, lien property. So now comes the last line of the Mishnah, which says, listen, if you're smart, if you're a man, right, here the woman was very smart. Pikrim, if you're a smart man, hayu kotvim, they would say, al menasha azun pitech chamesh shanim kol zman sha'atimi. Not so easy to do this when you're getting married. You're kind of alluding to the fact that maybe you won't stay married, but he should have said, yes, I commit to feed your daughter as long as we're married. This is always, you should have, could have, would have. Itma. The Gemara starts with a different topic, and then we'll connect it to our Mishnah. With that, we'll finish for today. If I say to you, I owe you 100 zuz. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav. The only proof we have is my saying this. So Rabbi Yochanan says you're obligated. Reish Lakish amar, and that's you have. If I say I owe you, I have to pay you. Reish Lakish says patul. What are you talking about? No, not at all. I don't have to pay anything. So hechidami, what's the case? If I say I want witnesses, and in front of witnesses I say I owe you 100 zuz, my time to Reish Lakish to kapatal. Everyone agreed that I'm responsible because I set up witnesses, I obviously meant it seriously. If you didn't say those words, why would Rabbi Yochanan actually obligate me? Many people say, I owe you money. Now, this is a little strange, but why would I say I owe you money? People didn't always want to look like they had money. So if I say I owe you a lot of money, it makes me look like I don't have money. And then it'll preclude, people will not bother me for loans. Okay. Or maybe even to give stuck, or I don't know what. But I don't want people harassing me about money. So I say, oh, I owe you all this money. And I say it in front of maybe people. I don't get witnesses. If I got witnesses, I get myself into trouble. But I just kind of make this statement to make it look like I owe you money so that I look like I don't have a lot of money. And it doesn't really mean that I meant, right? And therefore, why would Rabbi Yochanan say you're chayav? To which they say, Lo lahem atemeda. Sorry, delo ka'amalu atemeda. You didn't specify witnesses, that's for sure. What's the case? Different ways to understand this line. You could say either I said, I owe you money and we have a document, even though I didn't bring out a document. But by the fact that I said a document, that meant I was being serious about it. Or I had a document on which it wasn't signed by witnesses, because obviously then that would be a good proof. But I wrote on this, I owe you money. Maybe I signed my name, maybe I didn't sign my name. Some people say if I sign my name, then obviously it would be valid. Maybe I just didn't sign my name, but I just brought you like an IOU without names. So that already gives it more significance because I pulled out a star. So then we have a machlok. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav alima milta d'shtar command amarlu atemei dami. By bringing a document, it's as if you're saying, I want witnesses. Reish Lakish amar patul lo alima milta d'shtar. No, just having it in a document doesn't prove anything. Okay, doesn't make it any stronger, because could be I just really wanted to show people that I didn't have money, so I lied and I wrote something down on a piece of paper. And just because you read something on the internet doesn't mean it's true, right? Just a joke. Like you can make your own website, put up any false information you want, and then tell people, oh, go to this website, you'll see it written there. So Tanan, Hanosei Taisha. Now we're going to bring in our Mishna as an attempt to prove this. Like which way we go. Hanosei Taisha paskaimo lazun bita chamesh shanim chayav lazona chamesh shanim. What do you see here? She made this agreement with him. Now we assume, okay, it was between, you're about to get married. What, you think they wrote up a document? Witnesses? No, my love, Kiagamna, was it not like this? Where they made an agreement and he has to keep to that agreement. So what do you see? It's serious. Okay, I'm going to leave you hanging in midair. We're going to have to see tomorrow what the Gemara does with this, whether they think that this is the same or whether it's different. We will wait and see. Wishing you all Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, Moedim L'Simcha.